The day I turned 18 was the day I became homeless. It wasn't dramatic, not like in the movies. There was no shouting, no final explosive argument. There was just the quiet, firm click of our aunt's front door closing behind me and my sister, Maya. 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes sat on the porch beside us, containing the sum total of our lives. The air was cold for early October, and the sky was the color of dishwater. My aunt and uncle had waited for the precise day the state's monthly checks for my care would stop. It was a matter of accounting. Maya, who was 16, hugged her arms around herself, her thin jacket no match for the breeze that was picking up. She didn't look at me. She just stared at the closed door as if she could melt the wood with her gaze. I was the adult now, legally. The word felt like a costume that didn't fit, itchy and too large in the shoulders. I had $112 in my pocket, money I'd saved from a summer job bagging groceries. It felt like a fortune and nothing at all. This was it, the start of my real life, a beginning that felt exactly like an end. If you've ever felt the world shrink down to the size of a single, locked door, if you've ever had to find a reason to take the next step when you're standing on a cliff edge, then you might understand what came next. And if you do, I hope you'll stick with me for this. Consider hitting that subscribe button, because the story I'm about to tell isn't just about a rusted old building. It's about what it takes to build a home when you have nothing left. We spent that first night in a motel off the highway that smelled of stale smoke and bleach. The kind of place where you pay in cash and don't ask questions. Maya fell asleep with the television on, its blue light flickering across her face. She looked so young, her features softened in the dim light, and a wave of guilt so powerful it was nauseating washed over me. I was supposed to protect her. That was the promise I'd made to my parents, a silent, desperate vow at their funeral 5 years ago. And here we were, adrift. I stayed awake all night, staring at the textured ceiling, my mind a frantic Rolodex of failures. The social workers who had placed us with our mother's sister had called it a stable family environment. They checked in once a year with a phone call. They never saw the resentment in our aunt's eyes or the way our uncle tallied every expense we incurred. We were a line item, a burden they'd tolerated for the sake of appearances and a modest stipend. And now the account was closed. The next morning, while Maya was in the shower, I dumped the contents of my backpack onto the scratchy motel bedspread. T-shirts, a dog-eared paperback, and a handful of envelopes. Most were junk mail, but one was different. It was thick, creamy paper addressed to me, Leo Vance. It had arrived a week ago, and I'd tossed it aside, assuming it was a college recruitment letter or some other piece of irrelevant mail. The return address was a law firm, Abernathy and Sons, attorneys at law, Northwood Creek. I'd never heard of the firm or the town. I slit the envelope open with my thumbnail. The paper inside was heavy, official. The words were dense, legalistic, a language from another world. I had to read the first paragraph 3 times before it began to make sense. It spoke of the estate of Elena Vance, my grandmother, a woman I barely remembered, a figure made of fading photographs and the scent of cinnamon. We'd been told she moved to Florida after our grandfather died, then just drifted away. My parents were vague about it, their answers clipped and uncomfortable. After they died, she was a ghost we didn't speak of. According to this letter, this ghost had left me something. It stated that upon my 18th birthday, I was entitled to claim my inheritance. It described the asset with baffling simplicity. The property and all contents therein, located at 14 Main Street, Northwood Creek, colloquially known as the Northwood General Store. A general store? It sounded like something out of an old western. Then came the strangest part. A clause so bizarre, I laughed out loud. A short, sharp sound in the quiet room. In order to take possession, I was required to appear in person at Mr. Abernathy's office and formally purchase the property for the contractually stipulated sum of $6 US. $3 for my portion and $3 for my sister, Maya Vance, for whom I was to act as legal guardian in the transaction. Was this a joke? A cruel, elaborate prank? $6. It was absurd. But as I sat there on that lumpy bed, the smell of bleach in my nose and the weight of my sister's future pressing down on me, absurdity felt a lot like hope. It was the only thing we had. I found the phone number at the bottom of the letterhead. My hand was shaking as I dialed. An older man's voice, calm and measured, answered on the second ring. Abernathy. I took a breath. "Hello, Mr. Abernathy," I said, my own voice sounding thin and young. "My name is Leo Vance. You sent me a letter." The bus ticket to Northwood Creek cost $34, a significant portion of my worldly wealth. The bus station was a grim, gray place, full of people who looked as lost as I felt. Maya was silent, huddled in her seat with her headphones on, creating a bubble of music to keep the world out. I watched her, the line of her jaw tight, and I knew she was just as scared as I was, but she was trying to be strong for me. We were a team, the last two members of a club no one wanted to join. The bus pulled away from the curb, and I watched the city blur into a smear of concrete and glass. We passed through endless suburbs, rows of identical houses with manicured lawns that felt like a personal insult. Then the landscape began to change. The buildings fell away, replaced by flat, open farmland stretching to a horizon that seemed impossibly far away. The farther we went, the more the trees closed in. The highway narrowed from 4 lanes to 2, winding through hills that grew into small, rugged mountains. The trees were a riot of autumn color, fiery reds and brilliant oranges against the dark green of the pines. It was beautiful, but it was a severe, lonely kind of beauty. It felt like we were traveling back in time, or to the edge of the map. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window, my mind replaying the phone call with Mr. Abernathy. He had been polite, professional, but deeply uninformative. Yes, the letter was legitimate. Yes, the property was waiting. No, he couldn't describe its condition over the phone. "It's something you need to see for yourself, son," he'd said, his voice gentle. When I asked him about our grandmother, there was a long pause. "Elena was a remarkable woman," he'd finally said. "She made her arrangements very carefully." Arrangements. It was such a sterile word for what felt like a message in a bottle tossed into the ocean years ago. I tried to summon a clear memory of her. I was maybe 6 or 7 the last time I saw her. I remembered a large, warm kitchen that smelled of baking bread and something spicy like cloves. I remembered her hands covered in flour as she let me knead a small piece of dough. I remembered a laugh that seemed to start deep in her belly. And then, nothing. A void. Our parents told us she'd retired, that she wanted a quiet life. The story was full of holes, but when you're a kid, you believe the stories you're told. Now, I wasn't a kid anymore. I was a legal guardian with $80 to his name, on a bus to a town he'd never heard of, to claim a mysterious inheritance from a grandmother who had vanished from his life. It was either the beginning of a new chapter or the dumbest decision I had ever made. As the bus engine droned on, I couldn't decide which. Maya nudged me, pulling one earbud out. "See that?" she whispered, pointing. A deer stood at the edge of the woods, its head raised, watching us pass. It was there and then gone. "I don't think we're in Kansas anymore," she said, a tiny smile playing on her lips. It was the first time she'd smiled all day. Northwood Creek didn't have a bus station. It had a wooden bench in front of a small, closed-up building with a sign that said Depot. The bus hissed to a stop, the driver called out the town's name, and we were the only ones who got off. He handed us our boxes and suitcases from the compartment below, gave us a curious look, and then the bus pulled away, its red taillights disappearing around a bend. The silence it left behind was absolute. It was broken only by the rustle of leaves and the distant caw of a crow. The air was different here. It was clean and sharp, scented with pine and damp earth. We stood on the side of the road, two kids and a pile of luggage, feeling like we'd been dropped onto another planet. The town's main street was a single lane of cracked asphalt lined with two-story buildings made of old brick and wood. Some had cheerful painted storefronts, a diner with a neon "open" sign, a hardware store, a post office. Others were vacant, their windows dark and dusty. It was a town that felt lived in, but also worn down, a place that was holding on. Mr. Abernathy's office was above the hardware store, up a narrow, creaking flight of stairs. The door was frosted glass with his name painted in elegant gold letters. We hesitated for a moment, then I knocked. The door was opened by a man who looked exactly like his voice sounded, old, calm, and deliberate. He was tall and thin, with a shock of white hair and kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. He wore a tweed jacket that looked as old as the town. "Mr. Vance," he said, extending a hand, "and Miss Vance, please come in." His office was filled with books. They lined the walls from floor to ceiling, their leather spines creating a tapestry of deep reds and browns. The room smelled of old paper and lemon polish. He gestured for us to sit in two worn leather armchairs that faced his large oak desk. He didn't waste time with small talk. He slid a thin file across the desk toward me. "This is the deed," he said. "As you know, the terms are unconventional. They were set by your grandmother many years ago. It's all perfectly legal, I assure you." He looked at me, his expression serious. "Are you prepared to complete the transaction?" I nodded, my throat suddenly dry. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the $6. They were crumpled and worn. I flattened them on his desk. 1, 2, 3 for me. 1, 2, 3 for Maya. It felt deeply, profoundly strange, like a ritual from a forgotten religion. Mr. Abernathy didn't smile. He simply took the money, opened a drawer, and placed it inside. Then he pushed a single, large iron key across the desk. It was heavy and ornate, blackened with age. "She's all yours," he said. He walked us down the stairs and along the street. He didn't say much, just pointed out the diner and the market. Then we stopped. We were standing in front of it, the Northwood General Store. The rust was worse up close. The corrugated metal siding was streaked with it, great orange tears weeping from every bolt. The painted letters were so faded you could barely make them out. Two large windows flanked the central door, both covered with plywood from the inside. It looked more than abandoned. It looked defeated. a monument to forgotten things. My heart, which had been fluttering with a fragile hope, sank into my stomach. This was a wreck, a ruin. I glanced at Maya. Her face was a mask of disbelief. "This is it?" she mouthed silently. I could only nod. Mr. Abernathy seemed to read my thoughts. "She hasn't been opened in almost 15 years, he said quietly. "Your grandmother, she wanted it to wait for you." He handed me a small, sealed envelope. "She asked me to give you this after the sale was complete. My work is done. If you need anything, you know where to find me." He gave us a small, sad smile, turned, and walked back toward his office, his footsteps echoing on the quiet street. We were alone again, standing in front of our inheritance. I took a deep breath and stepped up to the door. The key was cold in my hand. I pushed it into the lock. It resisted, gritty with rust and disuse. I had to put my shoulder into it, turning with all my weight, until, with a deafening screech of protest, the lock turned. The door swung inward into darkness. The smell hit us first. It was the smell of time itself. Dust, thick and heavy in the air. The dry, papery scent of decaying cardboard. The faint, ghostly aroma of old wood. And something else. Something underneath it all. A phantom scent of coffee beans and cinnamon and tobacco. We stepped across the threshold. It was like stepping into a photograph. The store was a cavern of shadows, with shafts of dusty sunlight cutting through the gloom from high, grime-coated windows near the ceiling. A long wooden counter ran the length of the left wall, its surface invisible beneath a thick blanket of gray dust. Behind it, rows of empty shelves climbed toward the ceiling. A pot-bellied stove stood cold in the center of the room. On the counter sat an ancient, ornate cash register, its brass tarnished to a dull brown. Everything was perfectly preserved and utterly neglected. It was a time capsule, a tomb. We explored slowly, our footsteps silent in the thick dust. In the back, we found a small office, barely bigger than a closet. A simple wooden desk, a chair, a filing cabinet. And on the desk, a black metal box. It was heavy, industrial, with a serious-looking lock. I tried the lid, but it was sealed tight. There was no key on the desk, nothing in the drawers, which were empty except for a few dried-up pens and paper clips. This box felt important. It felt like the heart of the mystery. We had the building, but the secrets, I knew, were in that box. The search for the key became our first mission. It gave us a purpose, a focus in the overwhelming strangeness of our new reality. We had no power, no water, and a rapidly dwindling supply of cash. We bought bread, peanut butter, and bottled water from the small market down the street, and we spent our first night sleeping on the floor of the store's back room, wrapped in our jackets. It was cold, and the unfamiliar sounds of the old buildings settling around us were unnerving, but we were together, and for the first time since our parents died, we were in a place that was ours. The next day, we began the hunt in earnest. We searched the office first, tapping the walls, checking under the desk, shaking out the few old ledgers we found in the filing cabinet. The pages were filled with my grandmother's elegant, looping handwriting, documenting sales of flour, nails, and candy from 1998. It was like reading a diary of the town. We moved out into the main store, a vast and dusty landscape. We ran our hands along the tops of shelves, peered into dark corners, and lifted the lids of old barrels that still smelled faintly of pickles and grain. With every dusty object we touched, every forgotten corner we illuminated with the beams of our flashlights, The store felt less like a tomb and more like a sleeping giant. We were waking it up. I found remnants of my own childhood, a faded chalk drawing of a lopsided house and a smiling sun, taped to the inside of a cabinet door behind the counter. I remembered drawing it, my grandmother lifting me up so I could stick it there. The memory was so vivid it made my chest ache. This store wasn't just a building. It was a part of my own forgotten history. It was this memory that led me to the key. I remembered a game we used to play, hide and seek. My favorite spot was a small, dark space under the front counter, accessible through a loose panel. I'd curl up in there, breathing in the smell of old wood, listening to my grandmother's footsteps as she pretended she couldn't find me. On a hunch, I went to the front counter and felt along the dusty baseboard. My fingers found the edge of a loose plank. It was stiff, but it came away with a little effort. I shone my flashlight into the dark space behind it, and there, glinting in the beam, was a small brass key attached to a piece of string that was pinned to the back of the plank. It was exactly where a 7-year-old would think to hide his greatest treasure. My heart hammered in my chest. "Maya," I called out, my voice echoing in the huge, quiet space. "I found it!" We carried the metal box to the front of the store, where the light was best, and set it on the dusty counter. My hands were trembling as I fit the small key into the lock. It turned with a smooth, satisfying click. I lifted the heavy lid. For a moment, we just stared. The box was full. On top, there were bundles of cash, held together with rubber bands. $100 bills. We counted it right there on the counter, our hands shaking. $10,000. It was a staggering amount of money. It was food. It was a generator. It was security. It was a future. Beneath the money was a thick stack of letters, tied with a faded blue ribbon. The top envelope was addressed in my grandmother's familiar looping script. "For Leo, when the time is right." I untied the ribbon. The paper was brittle with age. I took out the first letter, unfolded it, and began to read aloud, my voice echoing in the silent store. Maya stood beside me, her hand gripping my arm. "My dearest Leo," it began, "if you are reading this, it means I am gone. It also means you are 18 and you are free. I hope with all my heart that you have found your way here, to the only thing of value I had left to give you." The letter went on to unravel the story we never knew. She hadn't abandoned us. Our parents, her son and his wife, whom she loved dearly, had made a terrible mistake. They had borrowed money to start a business, a dream that had turned into a nightmare. The people they borrowed from were not bankers. They were predators. When the business failed, the debt grew and the threats began. They were in danger, and by extension, so were we. Our grandmother, Elena, did the only thing she could think of to save her family. She gave our parents her life savings and signed over the deed to the store, her only asset, to cover the debt. The condition was that they had to leave, to disappear, and she had to sever all ties with them. It was a brutal, heartbreaking deal designed to protect the most important people in her life, her grandchildren. She couldn't risk the creditors coming after her, and through her, finding us. So she vanished from our lives to become our invisible guardian. She had Mr. Abernathy set up the trust, the bizarre $6 sale, a piece of legal genius to ensure no one could ever claim the property was part of any outstanding debt. It was an arm's-length transaction that made the store untouchable. It wasn't abandonment, it was a shield. The letter ended, "I have watched you from afar, through the eyes of a good man in town. I know you have grown strong and kind. This store is not a palace, my boy. It is old and tired, but it is built on a foundation of love. What you do with it is up to you. It is your story now. All my love, forever, your Grandma Elena." I finished reading and looked up. Tears were streaming down Maya's face, and I realized my own cheeks were wet. The entire narrative of our lives, the story of being unwanted, of being left behind, had just been completely rewritten. We weren't the abandoned children of a family that fell apart. We were the protected children of a woman who had sacrificed everything. The weight of that love, a love we never even knew existed, was a staggering, crushing, beautiful thing. The hours that followed were a blur of emotion. We sat on the dusty floor of the store, the letters spread out around us, and we cried. I cried for the grandmother I never got to know, for the fierce, secret love she had poured into protecting us. I cried for my parents, not with anger, but with a new, aching pity for the fear they must have lived with. And I cried for the two lost kids we had been, feeling so utterly alone in the world when we had a guardian angel all along. Maya, who usually kept her feelings locked down tight, was inconsolable. She held a photograph she'd found in the box, a picture of our grandmother holding her as a baby, and she wept for the stolen years. For a while, our roles reversed. I held her, rocking her gently, whispering that it was okay, even though I had no idea if it was. The truth was a raw, gaping wound. It changed everything. The story we told ourselves about who we were had been a fiction, a thin blanket over a much more complicated and painful reality. The store was no longer just a strange inheritance, it was a testament, a shrine. Every speck of dust, every rotten floorboard was part of a sacrifice made for us. The next day, my phone rang. It was Mr. Abernathy. His voice was as calm as ever, but there was a new urgency to it. "Leo," he said, "I've just had a call. I feel it's my duty to inform you. The development group that has been interested in the downtown lots for years has renewed their offer. They're aware the property has transferred ownership." He named a number. It was a life-changing amount of money. Enough to buy a nice apartment in the city. Enough for me to go to college without a mountain of debt. Enough to give Maya the stable, normal life she deserved, free from dusty old stores and the ghosts of the past. It was the easy way out, a clean break. "They're prepared to close quickly," Mr. Abernathy continued. "They see the lot, not the building. They'd tear it down, of course. Put up a block of modern retail units. Tear it down." The words hit me like a physical blow. Tear down this place my grandmother had bled for, this place she had saved for us? The thought was sacrilege. But the money, God, the money. I could be a real provider for Maya. I could give her everything we'd never had. Security, simplicity, a life without struggle. I looked around the store. It was a wreck, a money pit, a lifetime of hard work just to make it habitable. Selling it was the logical choice, the smart choice. But my grandmother's words from the letter echoed in my head. It is your story now. And this is the moment where everything could have changed. We had a choice. Take the money and run, or stay and fight for something we were only just beginning to understand. It's a choice a lot of us face, in different ways, isn't it? The easy path that offers security, or the difficult one that offers meaning. The choice between what the world tells you to want and what your heart tells you is right. If you've ever been at a crossroads like that, a place where your next step defines who you are, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. And if you're finding something of value in this story, something that resonates with your own journey, I'd be so grateful if you'd consider subscribing. Your support helps me keep sharing these stories, and it means more than you know. Now let's get back to that dusty old store and the impossible choice we had to make. I told Mr. Abernathy I needed time to think. I hung up the phone and walked outside, sitting on the cold wooden step in front of the store. The sun was bright, but the air was still crisp. Main Street was quiet. A few cars passed by. A woman walked her dog. It was a world away from the frantic energy of the city we'd left behind. Maya came out and sat beside me, not saying anything for a long time. She just watched the street with me. "What did he want?" she finally asked. I told her about the offer. I told her the number. I saw her eyes widen. She knew, just as I did, what that kind of money could mean for us. It was freedom. It was an escape. "We could get a place near the ocean," I said, testing the words. "You could finish high school without worrying about anything. We could just be normal." Maya picked at a loose thread on her jeans. She looked at the peeling paint on the doorframe, at the rusted metal siding. She looked at the name of the town on the post office sign across the street. "What do you think she would want us to do?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. The question hung in the air between us. What would Elena Vance, the woman who gave up everything, want us to do? Would she want us to take the money and live comfortably, her sacrifice finally paying off in a tangible, secure way? Or would she want us to honor the thing she saved, the physical manifestation of her love? "I don't know," I said honestly. I think she'd want us to be happy, to be safe." We spent the rest of the day in a state of suspended animation, walking through the town, not really talking. We ate dinner at the diner, a place called Carol's Corner. The woman behind the counter, Carol, was in her 60s, with a warm smile and tired eyes. She looked at us with open curiosity. "You're the Vance kids, aren't you?" she said as she poured our coffee. "You look like your father, but you have Elena's eyes." The mention of our grandmother's name so casually, so familiarly, sent a jolt through me. "You knew her?" Maya asked. Carol's smile softened. "Knew her? Honey, everyone knew Elena. This whole town ran on her coffee and her credit. When my husband got sick, she let our tab run for 6 months. Never said a word. She was the heart of this place." After dinner, we walked back to the store. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange that reflected off the dusty windows. We stood across the street and just looked at it. It was still a wreck, a dilapidated, forgotten building on a quiet street in a town in the middle of nowhere. But now it looked different. It wasn't just a property anymore. It was a legacy. It was a history. It was the heart of the town. Maya finally broke the silence. She turned to me, her eyes clear and fierce. "I don't want to sell it, Leo," she said. "This is home, or it could be. Our aunt's house was never a home. This feels real. She did all of that for us. We can't just let a developer tear it down and turn it into a parking lot." Her words didn't feel like a suggestion. They felt like a statement of fact. And in that moment, all my doubt, all my fear, all my logical arguments about the money, they all just evaporated. She was right. Selling it would be a betrayal, not just of our grandmother, but of ourselves. It would mean accepting the story that we were victims who needed to be rescued by a pile of cash. But we weren't victims, not anymore. I pulled out my phone and dialed Mr. Abernathy's number. "We're not selling," I said, before he could even say hello. Tell the developers the property is not for sale. Not now, not ever. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then I heard him let out a long breath. "I was hoping you'd say that," he said, and for the first time the professional calm in his voice was replaced by a genuine warmth. "Your grandmother would be very, very proud." When I hung up, I felt a sense of resolve settle over me, solid and heavy as a foundation stone. It wasn't relief, it was purpose. We had a home. Now we just had to build it. The next morning, we woke up with the sun. The decision had changed the very air in the store. It was no longer a place of mystery and grief, but a place of possibility. It was a project, our project. We took $1,000 from the cash box and walked to the hardware store. The man behind the counter was named Hank. He was built like a lumberjack, with a thick beard and hands like catcher's mitts. He watched us with skeptical eyes as we loaded a cart with cleaning supplies, heavy-duty trash bags, scrapers, and buckets. "Big job you've got there," he said, his voice a low rumble. "You're the kids who bought the old general store, right?" I nodded. "We're fixing it up." He grunted, unconvinced. "Heard a developer was sniffing around. Most folks would have taken the money." "We're not most folks," Maya said from behind me. Hank looked at her, then at me, and a flicker of something, maybe respect, passed through his eyes. He rang up our supplies. "Well," he said, handing me the receipt, "good luck. You're gonna need it." The work was brutal. The first task was just clearing out 15 years of accumulated junk and grime. We filled dozens of trash bags with rotting cardboard, old newspapers, and things that had long since become unidentifiable. Then came the cleaning. We scrubbed the floors on our hands and knees, the dirt so thick it was like a layer of pavement. We washed the windows, inside and out, and for the first time, clear, unfiltered sunlight flooded the main room, illuminating the clouds of dust we were still kicking up. It was backbreaking, exhausting labor. At the end of each day, we'd collapse onto our makeshift beds in the back room, every muscle aching, covered in a film of filth. But it was a good kind of tired. It was the ache of creation, of building something with our own two hands. We bought a small generator, which gave us power for work lights and a hot plate. We lived on canned soup and sandwiches, and every dollar we spent was carefully considered. The $10,000 that had seemed like a fortune was quickly proving to be just enough to get us started. Slowly, the town started to notice. People would walk by and peer in the now clean windows, watching us work. At first, they kept their distance. We were outsiders, city kids playing at being homesteaders. But we just kept working, day after day, sunrise to sunset. One afternoon, Char from the diner showed up at our door with a hot casserole dish. "You two need a real meal," she said, bustling in and setting it on the counter. "Can't live on peanut butter." She stayed for an hour, telling us stories about our grandmother, about the pot-bellied stove being the center of town gossip on cold winter days. When she left, the store felt a little warmer. A few days later, Hank from the hardware store dropped off a pickup truck full of lumber. "Had this left over from a job," he grumbled, avoiding eye contact. "Figured you could use it for patching those floors. No sense in it going to waste." It wasn't leftover. It was a gift. That was the turning point. After that, the help started coming in small, steady waves. An old man named George, a retired carpenter, showed up one morning and taught us how to reglaze the original window panes instead of replacing them, saving us hundreds of dollars. A local electrician offered to inspect the wiring for a couple of home-cooked meals. The town was slowly, cautiously adopting us. They saw our commitment. They saw us honoring Elena's memory. We weren't just fixing a building. We were weaving ourselves into the fabric of the community, picking up the threads our grandmother had left behind. We were becoming part of Northwood Creek, and for the first time in our lives, we felt like we belonged somewhere. Months passed. The vibrant colors of autumn gave way to the stark, quiet beauty of winter. A deep blanket of snow covered Northwood Creek, muffling the world in silence. Inside the store, a transformation had taken place. The floors were patched and sanded, the walls painted a warm, creamy white. The magnificent wooden counter had been stripped of its old varnish and refinished, its oak grain glowing in the light. We had installed new, simple wiring, and the bare bulbs hanging from the high ceiling filled the space with a bright, welcoming light. The pot-bellied stove, which we'd had professionally cleaned and inspected, was now the heart of the store, radiating a steady, comforting warmth. We had partitioned off the back third of the building, building 2 small, simple bedrooms and a functional bathroom and kitchen. It was small, it was basic, but it was ours. It was home. A home we had built with our own sweat and the kindness of strangers who were becoming friends. We had decided what the store would become. It couldn't just be a general store again. The world had changed too much. So we were going to make it a new kind of hub. The front half would be a coffee shop and bookstore, with comfortable chairs and tables scattered around the stove. We would sell coffee from a regional roaster, pastries from a baker in the next town over, and a curated selection of new and used books. It would be a place for people to gather, to talk, to read, to escape the cold. A place like the one Carol had described, but for a new generation. I often found myself standing behind that long wooden counter, the same one my grandmother had stood behind, just looking out at the snow falling on Main Street. I'd run my hand along the smooth, cool wood and feel a profound connection to her, to the past. The inheritance she had left us wasn't the building. It wasn't the $10,000 in the box. It was the choice. It was the opportunity to forge our own identity, not from the ashes of our family's trauma, but from the solid foundation of its love. The story of our lives had been so completely reframed. We weren't the kids who got kicked out. We were the kids who came home. We weren't abandoned. We were protected. The pain of our past hadn't vanished. The scars were still there, but they were no longer the defining features of our landscape. They were just part of a much larger, more beautiful map, a map that was leading us toward a future we were drawing ourselves. Hope was no longer a fragile spark. It was the warm, steady fire burning in the stove. One crisp, sunny afternoon in early spring, as the last of the snow was melting, Maya and I stood on ladders outside the store. We were painting the new sign. It was a simple, long plank of wood that we had sanded and prepared ourselves. In elegant, dark green letters, we were painting its new name. We worked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the dip of our brushes and the birds singing in the newly budding trees. Then Maya started to hum, a tuneless, happy sound. I looked over at her, her face smudged with paint, her eyes bright with concentration, and I felt a surge of love and pride so intense it almost buckled my knees. We had done it. We had taken the worst moment of our lives and turned it into the best thing that had ever happened to us. She caught me looking and grinned. "What?" "Nothing," I said, smiling back. "Just, this is good." "Yeah," she said, dipping her brush again. "It is." We finished the last letter and climbed down from our ladders. We stood back on the sidewalk, arms around each other's shoulders, and looked up at our work. The sign was beautiful. In simple, proud letters it said, "Elena's." An inheritance isn't always about what you're given. Sometimes it's about what you choose to build with the pieces you find. It's about taking a story that someone else wrote for you, with all its pain and its broken parts, and having the courage to write your own ending. Maybe you've been handed a story that doesn't fit you, a story of loss or failure, or of being told you're not enough. Maybe you're standing in the ruins of what you thought your life would be. I'm here to tell you that you can be the one to change it. You can pick up the tools, even if your hands are shaking. You can lay a new foundation, even if you have to do it one brick at a time. You can build a home inside yourself. Thank you for coming on this journey with us, all the way to Northwood Creek. If our story meant something to you, if it sparked something in you, please consider hitting that subscribe button and becoming part of this community we're building here. We believe that our stories have the power to heal us and to connect us. And I have one last request. In the comments below, please tell me one thing, big or small, that you are choosing to build in your own life right now. I promise I will read every single one, because I believe with all my heart that your story matters. Until next time, be kind to yourselves and keep building.